when I say that the demands of American industry and manufacturing changed conceptions of time, I do want to try and give you an example. Being paid by the hour is sort of one example, but maybe this will be a better example. Going back to Benjamin Franklin, of all people, in his autobiography, he reports about his experience in a shop. This was a print shop. And in that print shop, he notes that the workers would often kind of stop work in the morning, and they would go buy some kind of beverage like ale or, some alcoholic beverage. Well, they'd stop at lunch and they'd do the same. Sometimes they knock off at later in the afternoon and go drink some more. It was not uncommon for workers to have alcohol in the workplace because you're talking about a shop, you're talking about a few people, you're talking about a pace of work that is moving toward completion of the final product. You're not responsible for one small step, but a final product. And the craftsperson, that's who has the skill, who will bring that product and all of its parts from their original condition to a finished product. All that is handled by the craftsperson, the master. It's a different pace. You may work, from sunlight to sundown or sunup to sundown. But the factory requires what you might hear referred to as a different habit of industry, an expectation, if you will, of the management of time, a certain discipline and the habits of one's existence, one's life. The idea, for instance, of the factory whistle that says now is time to start work. We won't depend upon the sun, we won't depend upon the natural light of the sun, but we'll begin to depend upon schedules set by expert managers. You might also consider, as I suggested earlier, that I had worked third shift, and I'm sure many of you have too. Third shift, well, that's in the dead of night. We moved to a point of working 24 hours a day, a point where you're running shifts around the clock because the machines, while they may wear out, don't get tired the same way human beings do. Time. The idea that we would work a certain number of hours for a certain amount of pay, time itself becomes wrapped up in this new manufacturing. Well, I merely wanted to suggest that there are social and cultural changes, and we'll talk more about them in a bit, that will correspond to the economic changes taking place in the United States. Some of these that I think are worth mentioning have to do with gender. Young women in particular had gone into the textile mills, for instance, well before the Civil War. They had been engaged in farm activities, work on the farm. They had also been engaged in cottage industry and home industry to raise money to help the family. Between 1880 and 1900, the number of women employed in the United States, employed sort of outside the home, grew from 2.6 million to 8.6 million. The nature of the work they were doing shifted from domestic service or domestic work, that is work around the house, to low-wage manufacturing and some limited clerical work. That means work in an office, secretary, clerk, assistant, those kind of things. But many translated their experience with domestic work into manufacturing. So we see large numbers of women taking jobs in textiles and also in food processing in the United States. For 70 hours a week, women might take home under $2. It was often the case that women, partly because of the nature of the work that was done, but mainly because of sex, that women were paid less than their male counterparts. Children also were part of this system. Carried into many of the factories that sprang up, particularly textiles in the late 19th century, was a sort of family structure of labor. Families including children, had worked on the farm. That same structure could be carried into the mill. Fathers would be held responsible for the discipline of their children who were employees, who were workers, but it's the father who takes responsibility. And often families chose to go into the mill because every cent that they could make was needed, was necessary to keep the family going. And that everyone should work at an early age was paramount to the survival of the family. Just to look at some statistics very quickly. In 1890, in the United States, more than 18% of children ages 10 to 15 were gainfully employed. They made a fraction of the adult wage, and often, not always, but often, because of their physical size, because maybe they had yet to fully develop, they weren't quite as large, they often were placed in very dangerous positions. It says something about the nature of childhood, I guess. But I just want to make this point as we move forward with these segments of lecture here, that the United States post-Civil War is undergoing a transformation. And that part of that transformation will be cultural and social as well as economic. For some individuals, the new changes that are occurring are positive. But for many Americans, the changes that are occurring in the late 19th century are extraordinarily negative. And what I'm going to argue over this series of segments, or in this lecture, is essentially that it's from the sense of alienation that begins to grow in the United States among those individuals who see themselves losing out in this new economy. Something that we talk about still today, right? The new economy and who's losing out and who's winning. Well, I'm going to suggest that in the late 19th century, as more and more Americans found themselves losing out, they began to organize in ways that reflected the new corporate concept, organized as collectives, and sought to bring about changes of their own that would benefit them. That's where this is headed, and we'll move on with the lecture in just a second.